In 1938, Britain's most prestigious engine maker promised the impossible. Over 1,750 horsepower from a single engine. The Rolls-Royce Vulture would revolutionize bomber warfare. Instead, it became aviation's most catastrophic failure, killing crews and nearly destroying Britain's bomber force. How did this engineering marvel become such a death trap? As Hitler's war machine thundered across Europe, Britain desperately needed heavy bombers that could strike deep into enemy territory. The Air Ministry demanded power, raw, unprecedented power. Rolls-Royce answered with audacity. They would create the Vulture, an engine so advanced that it would make every other power plant obsolete. But ambition and reality were about to collide at 20,000 feet, with deadly consequences. The Vulture emerged from the Air Ministry specification P.13/36, issued in May of 1936, calling for a twin-engine medium bomber capable of carrying about 8,000 pounds of bombs or torpedoes. In early 1937, the Air Ministry exercised their rights to order off the drawing board, skipping the usual development process in the rush to expand the RAF. This fateful decision meant that the Vulture would enter production before the fundamental flaws that it had could be discovered and corrected. The engine suffered from an abbreviated development period because Rolls-Royce suspended Vulture development in 1940 during the Battle of Britain to concentrate on the Merlin. The Vulcaneer was engineering poetry written in steel and aluminum. This X-24 configuration monster, essentially two Peregrine V12s joined at the crankcase, promised to deliver 1,845 horsepower from its 42-liter displacement. 24 cylinders fired in perfect harmony, 4 banks of 6 all breathing through a single-stage supercharger. It was the most complex piston engine that Rolls-Royce ever attempted. And when engineers first fired up the first complete 24-cylinder Vulture in September of '37, the ground shook. Test pilots reported the engine pulling like a freight train. Here was the beating heart for Britain's new generation of twin-engine heavy bombers. The Avro Manchester, the Hawker Tornado, the Blackburn B-20, they'd all danced to the Vulture's tune. This wasn't just an engine, it was Britain's aerial supremacy condensed into 2,750 pounds of precisely machined metal. The Vulture's displacement of 42 liters made it significantly larger than the 27-liter Merlin. Yet, the size advantage would prove to be its undoing. The engine's complexity went beyond mere cylinder count. Each of the 4 banks operated with precise timing, requiring a crankshaft design that had never been attempted at this scale. The master connecting rod arrangement, borrowed from radial engine technology, seemed elegant on paper but created unprecedented stress concentrations in practice. By November of '38, Vulture test engines had accumulated 1,150 hours of operation, but these control conditions masked the engine's fatal flaws. In the test cells, engineers could monitor every parameter, adjust cooling flow, and shut down at the first sign of trouble. In combat at 20,000 feet over enemy territory, there was no such luxury. Hey, if you're fascinated by engineering disasters that changed history, hit subscribe. We've got more stories of ambition, failure, and redemption coming your way. But from day one, the Vulture was cursed. Connecting rods snapped without warning. Main bearings overheated and seized. The complex cooling system couldn't cope with the heat that was generated by 24 cylinders packed into such a tight configuration. Engineers worked 18-hour days, redesigning components, strengthening materials, rerouting coolant flows. The Air Ministry, they started growing nervous. War was coming, and Britain's bomber force was betting everything on an engine that destroyed itself on test stands. Now, Rolls-Royce engineers faced impossible pressure. Fix the unfixable and fix it now. Company reputation, national defense, and aircrew lives all hung in the balance. Time was running out. As German bombs fell on Poland in September of '39, the Vulture still wasn't ready, but there was no choice. The Manchester bombers were rolling off production lines, and they needed engines. Ready or not, the Vulture went to war. From as early as August of 1939, Rolls-Royce wanted to cancel Vulture development to focus on the Merlin and Griffin engines, but the Air Ministry, desperate for heavy bomber capability, insisted development continue. The decision would cost lives. The engine's problems were systemic. The Vulture suffered from frequent failures of the connecting rod big end bearings, caused by a breakdown in lubrication, and also from heat dissipation problems. One pilot recalled, the bearings would collapse the connecting rod and the piston would fling out through the side of the engine, and bang, your engine just destroyed itself. The Avro Manchester entered service in November of 1940, and immediately the nightmares began. On operational flights, Vulture engines failed catastrophically. Connecting rods punched through crankcases. Oil systems hemorrhaged. Coolant boiled away. Pilots watched in horror as their port or starboard engine erupted in flames with no warning. Worse, the Manchester couldn't maintain altitude on one engine, so when a Vulture died, the bomber became a flying coffin. Crews had minutes, sometimes seconds, to bail out over enemy territory. Those who did make it back told horror stories, engines catching fire on takeoff, both Vultures failing simultaneously over the target, aircraft falling from formation like autumn leaves. By early 1941, Manchester losses were catastrophic, not from enemy fighters or flak, but from their own engines. Maintenance crews worked miracles keeping Vultures running, but it wasn't enough. One squadron commander wrote, "We fear our engines more than we fear the enemy." On the 13th of April of 1941, all Manchesters were temporarily grounded due to a higher than expected number of engine-bearing failures. On the 16th of June of 1941, a second grounding was ordered due to more engine trouble. These groundings left bomber squadrons scrambling to meet operational commitments with obsolete aircraft. Combined losses were 121, or 60.5% of the original 200 aircraft. From those losses, 33 were directly due to engine failures, 12 with the squadrons, 21 with training units, and another 28 aircraft lost during operations that were thought to have caused by engine failure. You love stories about failure breeding success? This one, I'm not so sure if it is one, but subscribe now for more incredible turnarounds in aviation history. So here's what makes the Vulture story even more troubling. From as early as August of '39, Rolls-Royce wanted to cancel Vulture development so that the company could focus its resources on other engines, mainly the Merlin and Griffin. The company recognized the engine's fundamental problems, but the Air Ministry felt that it needed the Vulture engine, so development continued. The X-24 configuration proved inherently problematic. Preliminary testing of the Vulture engine included building an X4 engine, and running this engine revealed that there were issues with the early 2-bolt connecting rod design. Stresses on the bolts caused their failure. While a 4-bolt connecting rod was developed, another issue was insufficient lubrication of main bearings. Issues with the coil ignition system came to light while testing the complete engines, resulting in a switch to magnetos. But these fixes came too late. Most damning of all, the Rolls-Royce's much smaller Merlin was already nearing the same power level as the Vulture's original specification, in part because of its accelerated development in 1940. The complex X-24 design became unnecessary, yet production continued. The breaking point came in spring of 1941. On the 13th of March of 41, L-7317 became the first Manchester to be shot down by enemy fire. On the 13th of April of that same year, all Manchesters were temporarily grounded due to a higher than expected number of engine-bearing failures. On the 16th of June of 1941, a second grounding of the type was ordered due to more engine trouble. The Air Ministry, they'd seen enough. What exactly made the Vulture so catastrophically unreliable? Apart from delivering significantly less than the design power, the Vulture suffered from frequent failures of the connecting rod big end bearings, which was found to be caused by a breakdown in lubrication, and also from heat dissipation problems. One of the 6 original Manchester pilots explained, "The engines never were and never did become reliable. They did not give enough power for the airplane, so we ended up with 2 extremely unreliable 1,750 horsepower engines having to haul a 50,000-pound aircraft. When a pilot lost one engine, there was only one way you went, and that was down." Now, one pilot recalled, "The bearings would collapse, the connecting rod and the piston would fling out through the side of the engine, and bang, your engine, it destroyed itself." The Vulture had become aviation's nightmare. Now, in one of aviation history's greatest pivots, Roy Chadwick, Avro's chief designer, performed emergency surgery on the Manchester. He stretched the wings, added 2 more Merlin engines, and created what would become the Lancaster, the greatest heavy bomber of World War II. The prototype, serial number BT-308, was assembled by the Avro Experimental Flight Department at Ringway Airport, Manchester, being modified from a production Manchester airframe. The Lancaster first flew in January of 1941, and the difference was immediately apparent. Where the Manchester struggled to maintain altitude on one engine, the Lancaster could lose 2 engines and still make it home. Production quickly ramped up across multiple facilities. Avro at Chatterton near Oldham, Metropolitan Vickers, which was about 1,080 aircraft, Armstrong Whitworth, Austin Motor Company at Longbridge, and Victory Aircraft in Moulton, Ontario. 6 major companies built 7,377 aircraft at 10 factories on 2 continents. At the height of production, over 1,100,000 men and women were employed working for over 920 companies. Where the twin-engine Manchester with Vultures was a death trap, the four-engine Lancaster with Merlins became legendary. It could lose two engines and still limp home. It carried the war to Berlin, sank the Tirpitz, and breached the Ruhr dams. The Lancaster delivered where the Manchester failed, all because disaster forced innovation. Of the 538 Vulture engines that were produced, over 60% suffered catastrophic failures. But the Manchester's operational life lasted just 18 months before withdrawal. Its loss rate from engine failure exceeded losses from enemy action. 200 Manchesters were built, and most were scrapped or converted into Lancaster prototypes, so at least there's that upside. But from this disaster came triumph. The Lancaster would go on to fly 156,000 sorties and drop 608,612 tons of bombs. What started as Britain's greatest aviation failure became the foundation for its greatest success. You enjoying the story so far? Well, subscribe now for more things that you wish you knew about aviation history. The Vulcan engine sits in museums now, a monument to ambition exceeding capability. It reminds us that in wartime, the pressure to deliver miracles can push engineering beyond the breaking point. Rolls-Royce learned hard lessons. Complexity, it's not always advancement. Proven designs beat revolutionary ones in a crisis, and admitting failure early can save lives. Veterans who flew Manchesters and survived to fly Lancasters, well, they never forgot the Vulture's vicious unreliability. One pilot wrote, "The Vulture taught me that the most dangerous enemy isn't always the one shooting at you." The Lancaster's combat record stands as the ultimate judgment of the Vulture's failure. The Lancaster proved far superior to its main competitor, the Halifax. 107 tons of bombs dropped for each Lancaster lost on operations, compared to just 48 tons per Halifax lost by the summer of 1943. Now, from 42 onward, the Lancaster was the primary British bomber in the Allied aerial offensive against Germany. It would carry the war's heaviest conventional bombs, from 4,000-pound cookies to the 22,000-pound Grand Slam earthquake bombs. The versatility that the Manchester never achieved became the Lancaster's hallmark, from the famous Dam Busters raid to precision daylight strikes on the Tirpitz. Now, today, when aviation engineers face pressure to deliver the impossible, they remember the Vulture. It stands as proof that sometimes the best engine is the one that doesn't try to reinvent physics. Vulture development was halted in 1941, and production ended in March of 1942. By then, the decision was academic. The Lancaster was already proving what the Manchester should have been. Even Rolls-Royce admitted that the Merlin was already nearing the same power level as the Vulture's original specification, making the complex X-24 configuration pretty unnecessary. The Vulture's failure taught the aviation industry crucial lessons about the dangers of complexity for complexity's sake. In the pressure cooker of wartime development, proven technology adapted and refined would always beat revolutionary designs that were rushed into service. The men who died in Manchesters paid the price for this lesson, but their sacrifice ultimately led to one of the war's most successful aircraft. Of the 7,377 Lancasters built, 3,736 were lost during the war, but they delivered their crews to the target and, more often than not, brought them home. That was something the Vulture could never promise. The Vulture story, it's not really about mechanical failure, it's more about the cost of pride, the danger of momentum, and the courage required to admit defeat. Rolls-Royce built their reputation on excellence, but the Vulture nearly destroyed it. Only by accepting failure and pivoting to proven technology did they help win the war. In the end, the Vulture's greatest contribution wasn't the power it promised, but the lesson that it taught. True engineering excellence, it's not about attempting the impossible, but rather delivering the reliable. The Lancaster's 50,000 safe returns proved what the Vulture's failures taught. If the Vulture's transformation from disaster to inadvertent triumph grabbed you, be sure to drop a like and subscribe. We've got more stories of aviation failures that changed history coming up. What should we cover next? Well, let us know in the comments below. See you next time.